Briefly. Not this one. This was inaugurated just like 3 months ago. Last year we got this CSR donation. So this is the room where we started. It has good features. That's the history. Passing out, it's still there. It's next door. So I thought that this was the digital microprocessors lab. So that was, yeah, it was 2 rooms, 4 and 5. Wipro and some the far end. Something to speak about. Yeah, sure. Can you close the door? Keep that open.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible to the back? Okay. Welcome to IISc and thanks for coming early in the morning. So all of you had breakfast? Yes. Okay. So you have to know food for probably next 3-4 hours. Okay. So I'm Sumit. I'm an assistant professor in this department. We are organizing this workshop for the second time. So I'll be briefly talking about that what we should expect in this workshop, and then we will start the talks. Okay. So why this workshop? Anyone? Any guess? So this is the first thing we don't want. You have to speak up. So I want at least one guess. Why this workshop? It was written in the website. No one? Really? Or I'll pick someone. You. Why do you think you are here? Yeah. No, you only. So if you are turning your head, that means it is you. You don't have to stand. You can just sit and tell.
I don't know. It serves as an opportunity to learn about computer science and to network with people.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. So what he is saying? What's your name?
Srisha.
Srishan?
Srisha.
What Srisha is saying that it's opportunity to know about computer science and network with people. Yeah, that's great. So this workshop is focused on computer systems. Like all of us are using cell phones, laptops, and many of us are also using high performance servers, right? Now, when these industries are making these servers, they think before making it, correct? A lot of research goes behind those computer systems. Okay. So I'll give you one example, like why this workshop is relevant in nowadays. So all of you have heard about ChatGPT. So who has heard about ChatGPT? Raise your hand. So what is this? Thank you. What is ChatGPT? Again. Sorry? Okay, good keywords. What is it actually? Generating assignment solution? Sorry? Okay, one person, yes.
They say it's like a calculator for text.
Sorry?
They say it's like a calculator.
Calculator for text. Okay, that's a nice answer. But I know, many of you probably take help from ChatGPT for your assignment and ends up getting the wrong answer. Okay, so it's basically an online solution to almost everything. Like earlier we used to Google it and then probably try to filter it, what is happening, and then take the best answer. But right now, ChatGPT is there, you just pasting the answer, getting the answer and just pasting it. Okay. But yeah, it's solution to everything. We are all amazed. But are we? Is there any downside of ChatGPT? So is there any downside of ChatGPT? Anyone? Yeah, apart from like ethical, all those things.
It's not up to date.
What do you mean up to date?
Like yesterday data will be like not that it's pre-trained, right?
Okay. Okay. What else? It will not think. It will not think. Okay. Anything else? From this side, I don't know why this side is more active than this side.
Biasness can be there.
Biasness can be there. Okay, I want one answer from this side.
Hallucinations.
Okay, fine. Yeah, those are nice answers. I'll try to give you one perspective. So how many of you came to IISc for the first time? Many of you, right? So what did you like about IISc most so far? What do you mean by atmosphere? Like since stratosphere? No, right? So what do you mean by, I know where you're getting, but what exactly? Lots of trees, greeneries? Okay. So see, many of you probably know that ChatGPT, there are some algorithms, right? And most of the time, or not most of the time, probably this ChatGPT uses transformer network as the backbone, and they are typically executed on high performance servers, right? Like there are GPUs, and maybe there are very, what should I say, like heavy CPUs. They're using those to run these inference workload, correct? And whenever you are typing in the prompt, they are executing that algorithm in their GPUs. Okay. Now, when the ChatGPT first came, like in I think early 2023, the estimated power consumed by ChatGPT in January 2023 was between 11 lakhs to 233 lakhs of kilowatt hours. Okay, and that is equivalent to the power consumption of 1.75 lakhs of people. That's huge.
This is annual consumption of
Sorry?
annual or month wise?
This is just 1 month, January 2023, when the ChatGPT first came. Okay. Now, if we just dig more, or if we just do more calculation, we will see that the daily carbon footprint of ChatGPT is around 24 kilogram of CO2 per day. Okay. That is equivalent to cutting down 406 trees every day. Means that many trees actually consume or actually saves 24 kilogram of carbon dioxide. Now, many of you mentioned that you liked IISc campus because of its greenery, correct? If we do cut down 406 trees every day, it will just take less than 2 months to cut down all the trees at IISc. There are approximately 22,000 trees, so it will just take less than 2 months to cut down all the trees for 1 month of ChatGPT. That's scary, right? Now, why it is like that? Because all those GPUs or whichever computers or whichever systems these ChatGPTs are running, they are power hungry. Now, there are lots and lots of research are going on with how to make all these systems energy efficient, how to still make it like fast. Like ChatGPT is fast. You do something in the prompt, you will just get the answer, right? Without sacrificing that latency, without sacrificing that time, how to make ChatGPT fast, but consume less energy. Now, of course, that is one aspect of computer systems. There are lots and lots of other aspects like security, like database, networks, everything. Now, in this workshop, you will actually see, or will actually learn various aspects of present and future computing systems which aid or eventually aid. Now, many of the talks you will hear or you will listen, they probably have not been implemented today. Probably 5 years or 10 years down the line, you will see in the market, right? Now, those systems, how will they actually aid many of these workloads? We will learn in these talks, and we are calling it as emerging workloads. Any question? So now, is it more clear? Why are you here? Okay. Any question? Okay, fine. So, few logistical things I'll just discuss. So, who are you? You came from different parts of India. So, this is a rough map. Like, where are you exactly from? Of course, many of you are from Bangalore, but few of you are from outside Bangalore also. So, interact with each other, learn each other more. It's a unique opportunity, right? And then who will be speaking? Who will be listening to? Again, they are also from different parts of India. They are the leading research minds in computer systems in India. Okay. Again, of course, you must have seen the agenda page. Like who are the speakers? So again, interact with them, ask questions, and learn new things. And few things to remember. Take notes. So all of you get the welcome kit. So there is a notebook. There's a pen. So we will see how much you fill the notebook, and then only we will issue the certificate. Okay, no, we'll issue to everyone, but make sure that you take notes so that, see, okay, another thing is that there were like I think 600 plus registrations. So you are the few people who got chosen. You should go back to your college, university, institution, and then show your notes to others so that others also learn from whatever you learned. Okay. Ask questions. Very, very important. I mean, don't think that your question is stupid. Okay. I mean, I already told you, right, that the stupidity lies in not asking the question. So you have to be vocal and ask question to the speaker. Maybe, who knows, if you ask the question, maybe the speaker may say that, okay, that aspect probably I didn't think. I will think about it later, which is a good thing, right? Because then that means you are thinking in the correct direction, right? Interact with the speakers and attendees. So yeah, I mean, you will have many opportunities to interact with them. We have many refreshment sessions. You can interact with them, learn more things. Okay. And then yes, I mean, CSA department is present in social media web pages. So you can just post your thoughts with hashtags. We have presence in Twitter @IIScCSA. You can also post your thought in LinkedIn. I mean, writing a post is easy. Again, ChatGPT. But write it yourself, I would say. So if you remember, in the registration page, there was a question, and there was one instruction. What was the instruction? Don't use ChatGPT. So you are here because probably you didn't use ChatGPT. That was one of the criteria. That if someone uses ChatGPT, it is easy to catch. So if someone used ChatGPT, then that person was not selected. Still, I am not saying that none of you use ChatGPT. If you ask me, I can tell you that, hey, you still use ChatGPT. Again, we are also live streaming all the talks in YouTube. So if you have friends or if you know someone who was interested but couldn't make it, they can go to our CSA webpage, CSA YouTube page and check all and listen to all the talks over YouTube. Yeah, for that you have to subscribe. This is the YouTube channel for CSA channel IISc. You have to subscribe and then you can get all the talks. So not only this workshop, there are many workshops lined up in this month. So probably all those talks will be either recorded or live streamed over YouTube. Not only workshop, there are series of talks happen in our department. So you can find all of them recorded over YouTube. Okay. So we will circulate this slide, don't worry. When you don't need to take photo. And finally, so for any like logistical issue, you have to spot the volunteers. They have this T-shirt. I think one of them is sitting right there. Okay. So you can spot the volunteers. If you have any issue, of course you can bring that to my attention. You can also ask the volunteers, like if you want to roam around the campus, etc., etc. You can just ask them. By the way, there is a fun event. I don't know whether you noticed or not. How many of you have noticed there is a fun event? Yeah. So to have fun, you have to first listen the talk carefully. Okay? I mean, it's a hint. So yeah, that's all. I won't take more time. So this is today's schedule. Next, I would like to request Vinod to come to the stage and
So my name is Vinod Ganapati and I'm currently the chair of the department, and what I'd like to do is to give you a brief overview of the institute, the department, and I also wear another hat. I am a system security person myself, so I'll give you sort of a brief technical talk about some of the basics of security. Okay? All right, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with the story of the institute, but here it is. Three really great people had to come together to create this institute. So the story goes that in 1893, J.N. Tata, uh, who is the original founder of Tata Sons, was on a voyage from Japan to Vancouver on this ship Queen Elizabeth, and he happened to meet Swami Vivekananda on the same ship. And in that voyage, actually, he expressed to Swami Vivekananda the desire to start a research institute that was based in India. At that time, his goal was to create something that would develop, for example, new methods to process raw materials and so on. But anyway, he had this dream, and he infected, in some sense, Swami Vivekananda with this vision of his. And later on, in 1896, he wrote a letter to Swami Vivekananda reminding him of this vision. And you can see from here an excerpt from that letter. It says, "It seems to me that no better use can be made of the ascetic spirit." And here he was referring to Swami Vivekananda's talk at the World Fair at Chicago, for which Vivekananda really became famous. Ascetic spirit than the establishment of monasteries or residential halls for men dominated by the spirit, where they should live with ordinary decency and devote their lives to the cultivation of sciences, both natural and humanistic. Okay, so this was the vision, and Swami Vivekananda, being the person that he was, took it upon himself to try to convince the then British administration to set it up. Unfortunately, the institute didn't come to life either in J.N. Tata's lifetime or in Swami Vivekananda's lifetime. It took a lot of work by several others to make it a reality. But J.N. Tata left a lot of his own personal wealth so as to help the creation of the institute. There was a third person who played an important role. Why is the institute here and not in Jamshedpur or in Roorkee? It's because of this third person, who is Krishnaraja Wadeyar, who is the Maharaja of Mysore. He gave this land entirely for free to set up this educational institution. So that's why we are here, and we hope to live up to the spirit and the thought behind which it was created. Okay, so that's the institute, and our own department was founded in 1969. You would have seen CSE departments, CS departments everywhere. This is probably the only CSA department in the country. You can tell your friends it's the Department of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence, just going with the current flow. But this is so we are at present the top ranked computer science department in India based on research output, and we were the only CS department ranked in the top 100. Most of my colleagues and the students here have a presence at all the top international research forums. Our graduates are highly sought after both nationally and internationally. And there is a vast amount of work going on in the department spanning computer systems, about which you will hear over the next 5 days. AI/ML, also you'll hear a little bit about that, and theory. And this slide, you can see it later when you get access to these slides. There's a whole variety of projects, and I can't do justice to all of these projects in the span of half an hour that I have over here. But there's, what you should take away is that there is a huge amount of work going on over here in all aspects of CS. And in terms of degrees, we have 4 kinds of degrees that we offer here. The PhD degree, the MTech by research, which is kind of midway between an MTech and a PhD. It's a 2.5-year degree which involves writing a significant thesis, an MTech by coursework, and an MTech in AI. In addition to this, there is a BTech in Maths and Computing program. So all of these are things that our department participates in. And this is what our student body looks like, roughly 300 students with around 95 PhD students in the department. And our main focus here is to do CS research, cutting edge CS research. Of course, what we are proudest of is the accomplishments of our students, and this is just a snapshot of some recent graduates, all of whom have ended up, doing really good stuff, and making a name for themselves in their corresponding research areas. So Arpita, for example, just joined the tenure track at Rutgers. Ashish Panwar is a senior researcher at Microsoft Research India. Divya Ravi just recently joined as an assistant professor in Amsterdam, and Shruti joined IIT Bombay, and Shikhar joined Google. And you can see here, for example, many of our graduates end up winning or close to winning the ACM Doctoral Dissertation Award in India. So that's a testament to the quality of the work that they do. Finally, our department also has a rich culture of entrepreneurship. So you go to the internet, you can search for the pictures of the garage in which HP was incubated, or Amazon was incubated, or where Google came up. You are sitting in the room where Wipro was incubated. Okay, so you can read about it here later on. 1979, Wipro came to life in this room right here, and that's of course they're a major giant, and that's our Indian story here of entrepreneurship. You'll hear next from my colleague Uday Reddy, who's the founder of Polymage Labs that you see listed here. This is a startup in the area of compilers applied to machine learning. There's also Strand Genomics, which came out from this department, and Mimic, which is an AR/VR company in the healthcare space that also was incubated here in this department. This is just a small snapshot. And that sort of concludes my overview of the department. And what I'd like to do is to give a small tech talk on thinking outside the box and inside it. This is more a computer systems focused talk. And so I just want to explain this title a little bit. It's actually a play on words. So you'll attend a lot of talks. People will tell you to think outside the box, which you have to do. If you want to be creative, if you want to push the boundaries of the field. I'm going to tell you a little bit about thinking inside the box today. Okay, and what that means is really two things, right? Inside the box. Box is a play on words again for a computer system. You hear about a Linux box, a Windows box, and so on. So this is to learn to think about computer systems as a computer systems person. And of course, learning to think inside it, I also like to think about it as, really knowing your fundamentals, right? If you don't know that, you can think creatively as much as you want, but you're building on a house of cards. Okay, and that won't really last long. So whatever you do in your future, right, ensure that your creative thinking is based on solid foundations, right? You can follow the buzzword of the day, you can build systems based on those buzzwords, but never forget your fundamentals. And so what I'd like to do is to really talk about some basic principles. It's important to understand the fundamentals and ask how and why whenever you're told something new. And you don't just have to follow the buzzwords. Of course, you have to. It's inevitable these days, but you have to be creative. And I will show you some examples of that. And I'd also like to convince you that there's a lot of creative work going on in computer systems and security. Okay, so we'll start off with thinking inside the box. And I don't know how many of you have taken a course in operating systems already. I'm sure all of you would have taken some sort of a course in computer organization. Has anybody not taken it? You can raise your hands. What about operating systems? Okay, all of you have taken operating systems. That's great. And you would have learned in your textbook that the main goal of the OS, in addition to abstraction, is protection. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to test you to understand what your opinion of protection is, and we will look at two examples. Okay, so let me put this up on the slide here. You can stare at it for some time. Basically, there are two programs here. Okay, C programs, both of which declare an integer pointer, and I am initializing the pointer to some hexadecimal value. You don't generally do this in a C program, right? But I'm assuming that this address is valid. You can dereference it and so on. So it's there, okay? And the first program does star p equal to 1, and the second one does star q equal to 2. And you will notice it's the same address, okay? And there's a printf statement in the first program. And what I'll tell you is that I'm going to take both of these programs and I'm going to compile them on top of a standard time-sharing operating system. And we'll assume that we have got a really old machine, a uniprocessor machine, which means only one process can run on this processor at any given point in time. And it's the job of the operating system to switch back and forth between these processes as it sees fit to complete the task at hand. Okay? With me so far? Okay. So now, I'm going to ask you, what is the output of the printf on line P4? What do you think it is? I'll present some options. Okay, so the output is always 1. The output could be 1 or 2. Both programs could crash. What is it?
A.
A?
Always one.
Always 1. Anybody with B? You can interleave these statements in any way you want to. How many of you are A? Lift your hands up. You have had breakfast, no? So lift. A, okay. B? C? Okay. So those of you that think the program can crash, why do you think it will crash?
Sir, because we are addressing two digits in a single memory.
2 digits in a single memory. What does that mean?
1 or 2, 0x, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I think it could crash.
Why would it crash if you address the same location?
Sir, I thought it could be. It will be. It might be.
You can have threads that modify the same memory location, right? And programs don't crash. So it should be fine that way. Any of you want to? Yes?
I have a doubt.
Yeah.
If two programs are writing to the same memory address, won't it induce a race condition?
Won't it induce a race condition? Good. That's why you have option B. You can raise your hand for option B. Right? So you're right? I mean, whoever wins the race would end up writing to that location. If that's what you think it is. Okay. So that's the race condition, right? So now how many of you would like to revise your answers based on what you've heard so far? Option A. Only 3 people. There were 50%. Now 4. Okay. 4. Going 5, 5, 5, 5. 6. Okay. How many of you think it's B? Race conditions. Okay, nearly the whole class. How many of you think it's C? Good. So now I have thoroughly confused you. You have forgotten your fundamentals. Okay. It's always A. Okay. It could be C if the memory is not a valid location. But if you assume that the program doesn't crash, it's always A. And the reason is because you would have studied this in your undergrad OS class. You would have learned the notion of a virtual address space. Okay. That's what it is. Right? What you're seeing here is the notion of a virtual address space in action. No address in a program can ever be a physical address. Okay? When you write to a memory location, you get the illusion you're writing to that memory location. A new set of addresses is created for you, and that is mapped to your physical memory by means of all of the magic in the hardware as well as in the OS, so as to ensure that the write persists, right, in memory. But two programs, when a program references an address, it's always a virtual address. Okay? If this were a physical address and you could have race conditions, you should just ask yourself what will happen on your phone or your laptop when you have 15 different programs running at the same time. Won't they all interfere? Right? So that should be your red flag right there. Okay? So the answer here is always 1, because that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is a different memory location for program A and program B. It's a different physical memory location. The virtual addresses are the same, and it's the magic of virtual memory that sort of makes sure that these two programs don't interfere with each other. So there is no race condition. Okay? A race condition can happen if you have threads within the same process. These are two different processes, right? And they're completely isolated and completely protected by virtue of the notion of virtual memory. So yeah, so you have this notion of processes, and your code and data is loaded up into the process virtual address space. It looks identical for all processes, and on a 32-bit machine, you have 2 power 32 addressable locations, so you have 4 GB of memory. And this is roughly how it's laid out. I'm sure you've all seen this picture. All of you said you have taken a class in OS. You would have seen this picture, right? So the code is loaded up, the data, there is space allocated for it in the stack and the heap, and there is the kernel that's loaded up into the process address space. So you don't have to feel bad that you got this wrong. Nearly everybody that we ask this question gets this wrong, because it's very easy to confuse people. So the point is, you should not get confused. Learn to think inside the box. Okay? Never forget what you read in your OS class, and don't just graze at the surface level. Actually think about what that means. Okay? All right. So here is another program. Okay? And it's a 32-bit machine, right? So what happens is that you can see here the top 1 GB is where the kernel is loaded up. And here what I'm doing is that I'm creating a pointer. I'm initializing the pointer to something that starts with FF. We'll assume that that points somewhere to within the kernel address space, and this is a process, right? I'm going to compile it and run it as a user process. And I say star p equal to 1. What do you think will happen?
Seg fault it
What?
will do it will do
It will do a seg fault. Why do you think it will do a? Why do you think it will seg fault?
Privileged space.
Privileged space. Okay. Why is it a privileged space?
Because you're trying to modify the kernel.
it's a kernel space. You can't directly access it. You have to use the abstractions that are provided by OS to use the particular kernel space directly, like system calls or.
Okay. Okay. So what happens when you make a system call that allows you to suddenly make these changes?
That changes the CPU mode and then it allows.
Okay. Fine. And why is this unsafe? You get a segmentation fault. You're absolutely right. But why do you get a segmentation fault? Why should it not be allowed? So the principle is that you should use the OS abstractions to modify OS memory. But why should you? Why can't any process just modify kernel memory? What would happen if it does?
It's a security issue, basically.
So we saw in the previous slide that it's the OS that's responsible for example, for creating this notion of virtual address spaces. It is creating these isolated regions where different processes can execute. And the minute you allow a user space process to go modify the OS, all of those questions now, all of those assumptions that you made come under question. Okay, so the hardware ensures that you cannot really modify the OS memory from user space. And so you get a segmentation violation. And so in normal execution, a user space process should never modify or be even allowed to read kernel memory, right? This is something that the system will ensure for you. So now what I'm going to do is, so that's what this slide says, you should isolate kernel memory from user land, okay? That's another important principle that most computer systems enforce. So, and we also saw this notion of virtual and physical memory, and the way that virtual is mapped to physical is via the notion of page tables, right, which you would have seen. Now, what I'm going to do is give you a simple example of an attack. Okay, I don't think I will have the time to go through the entire story, but I will leave you with a teaser and with pointers for where you can probe further. And I'm now going to give you an example of how you can think outside the box. And let's look at a really creative attack. And so in order to do this, we just have to revisit this notion of a memory hierarchy, right? We all know about this. We see this pyramid when we study computer organization, which is that there are these small amounts of memory that we can access really fast, right? For example, registers are built right into the processor pipeline and you can access them fast. Then you have the caches followed by physical memory and then, the actual tertiary storage, right? And as you go down, the cost decreases, the quantity becomes more abundant as a result of the cost reducing, and the access time also correspondingly increases, right? And what you can see on the left-hand side of the slide is roughly in terms of processor cycles how long it takes to access that particular portion of the memory hierarchy. And what I'm going to show you is what is called a covert channel that makes use of the fact that there is this disparity in access time between registers and caches versus even accessing DRAM. You can see, for example, if you have to access physical memory, which is DRAM, takes on the order of around 25 to 50 cycles, whereas the cache is just on the order of a few tens of cycles. Okay, so what this is going to show you is how two processes can communicate with each other, even if the OS explicitly forbids communication between them. So we have got here two players. They're going to be processes on our computer system. There is Alice on the left and there is Bob on the right, okay? And they're going to communicate via this new kind of abstraction that I'm going to talk about, this notion of a cache-based covert channel that allow them to communicate bits of information between each other, okay? So, and the goal is going to be for Bob to communicate something to Alice, okay? And we'll assume it's 1 byte of information, okay? and byte by byte you can leak information this way. Okay, so if Bob is holding some secret and Alice is forbidden from talking to Bob, this is going to be the mechanism by which they end up communicating without explicitly having the permission for these two processes to communicate. Okay, so what Alice does is that she will create what is called a probe array in memory. First of all, she flushes the cache. She creates a probe array in memory. So this probe array is just an array similar to the ones that you create in your program, except that the array is designed in such a way that the size of each element is going to fit in a different cache line. Is going to be match a cache line, and each element of the cache, each element of this array is going to go in a different cache line. Okay, so she creates this probe array, and then what Bob does is that in order to communicate the value x, he goes and accesses index x. So if you want to communicate a byte of information, if Bob wants to communicate 8 bits of information, all Alice has to do is to create a probe array that's 256 elements long, okay, 2 power 8, okay, and what Bob does is that he goes and accesses this index x in this array. Now you all know that the cache is something that gets loaded up whenever there is an access to a memory location. That memory location is brought into the cache. That's how the processor pipeline accesses memory locations, right? Whenever you want to, let's say bring in some other element, you probably have to kick this element out into the DRAM, and then that's how it goes in the memory hierarchy. So now how will Alice go and figure out what this secret that Bob has tried to communicate is? Well, what she does, any guesses? She's got this probe array, and Bob has accessed element x. What do you think Alice has got to do to figure out that the value that Bob communicated to her is x?
She can access the entire array and then find which line she can access faster.
Yes. So all she does is that, so by the way, when Bob accesses the element, that element is loaded up into the cache. Right now the cache was flushed, it's empty, and what Alice does in order to read the secret is that she simply probes every element of the array and records the amount of time that it takes to read each element. Okay, and what you'll observe is some sort of a pattern like this, right, where you'll see certain amount of time that is required to access each element, and there is going to be a dip. This is not going to be a perfect process. This is noisy, but there's going to be a dip when you access this element x. Okay. This shows, and why is this? This is because that element has already been loaded up into the cache. This allows Alice to read what Bob was trying to communicate. Okay, and I'm just going to leave you with this. Oops, let me just go to the. And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to conclude now. What you saw was the beginning, the core idea behind what you might have heard about as the Meltdown and Spectre attacks. So these were attacks that came out in 2017, and since then there have been a ton of these side channel attacks against existing processors. Now, what do you think a solution to that previous attack might have been? It would have been to, do away with the notion of a cache. But can you do that really on a modern processor? We have come to live with the notion of a cache, right? Likewise, there are many assumptions in processors that have been developed over the last few decades in order to improve processor performance. And all of these attacks are now bringing those assumptions, those techniques into question. Okay, so this is an example of where people have developed computer systems, and you, if you're a security person, have to wear that hat and ask yourself, what are the implications of that, right? And what was shown in this Meltdown, for example, was that using this method, exactly the same method, but with a few more tricks, a user space process could access kernel memory, okay? And you could dump out the entire contents of physical memory from an unprivileged user space process, okay? And that's a huge security violation, because you can now read the secrets of every other process that's running on the system. For example, if you have a banking session, you can read the entire banking session. It's in the clear in your browser. It's not encrypted, okay? You can read the entire thing. You can read cookies, you can read web browsing history, you can read stored passwords. Everything can be available to an attacking process, and it's an unprivileged user process. Okay, so I'll leave you with these thoughts. You can sort of go to this website. It's our lab webpage, and there is more there. And of course, I think these slides will be shared, and You can read up the details. There are a few slides that I skipped in the interest of time, but the entire meltdown attack is in the slides if you're interested later on. It's 5 lines of assembly code. Okay, so you can actually go and read it up later. I'll stop here.
Okay, let's thank Vinod.
Yeah.
Question.
Sorry. My name is Neeraj Kundu. I am from SBI. So why there was a dip that you show in that particular memory access?
I'll
that-
go there.
Yes.
Right here. So what you're doing here, or what Alice is doing here, is that she's accessing every element of the array. Okay, each element of the array occupies a different cache line. Okay, and element X has already been loaded up into the cache because Bob accessed it. So when Alice tries to access it, she will find it there, or the processor will find it there, and so the access time is going to be less, right? And this happens because of the pyramid structure of the access times, as a result of which. Right?
But it means you are saying she will access it from cache line.
She doesn't access, you cannot access the cache directly, right? That happens within your processor. You can do it programmatically by just simply iterating through this array from 0 to 255. You will see a dip when you come to X.
Fine.
Okay, that's how you.
Anyone else? Okay. Come.
I'm Virat. I'm from Microsoft Research. So I'm just so even last time we just saw that ideally Bob should not be able to access this element of the probe array which Alice has written to, for example. So how exactly does that work? Like briefly.
Sorry, Alice.
How does Bob access probe array X, for example? Because
So you can assume that it's set up as a shared memory region
okay.
that Alice and Bob sort of have access to, and that's the only way in which they can sort of write locations. And so it's probably a shared data structure that Alice and Bob set up so that their processes, that's the only thing that they can communicate with.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? There has to be more questions, by the way. No one else? Okay, people are still warming up. Okay, if there is no question, then we can thank Vinod again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on. Our next speaker is Vaishnavi Sundararajan. She is an assistant professor in computer science and engineering department at IIT Delhi. She is a Chandruka New Faculty Fellow and assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering in the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. She is also associated with the Center of Excellence in Cyber Systems and Information Assurance. Her main interests lie in the application of formal methods and logic to various fields, primarily security. Vaishnavi completed her PhD at the Chennai Mathematical Institute, and after her PhD, she has worked at CNRS, Ericsson Research, and at UC Santa Cruz. Over to you, Vaishnavi.
Thank you. Okay, so hi everybody. This is going to be a very informal sort of talk. It is fairly abstract material, so feel free to stop me at any point of time if you have comments, questions, whatever it is. All right. So it's a fairly clickbaity title, but I promise it will bear out. All right. So what is this talk about? As we all know, we spend like a large fraction of our waking hours online these days. And that means interacting with complex digital systems, right? Whether this means banking, whether this means social media, whether this is email, whether this is stuff like Aadhaar, whether this is stuff like Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's all online. And they're all complex systems, right? So the main question that, if you haven't been asking yourself this already, that you should be asking is, do these systems behave as they are supposed to? Right? And that's the question that we're going to be trying to answer in this talk. Right? So basically, for the most part, most of us, we tend to trust the developers and keep calm and carry on. Right? But what do the developers do? Right? Developers basically do something that is quality assurance, which is mostly testing. And they kind of at some point put their hands up and say, okay, we hope that this is exhaustive, it covers all possible cases. So every bad thing that can happen has kind of been accounted for. Right, but unfortunately, or as things are, for safety critical systems, even one missed rogue use case can be disastrous. And we've seen this borne out multiple times over the past. We've seen planes crash because of this. We've seen millions of dollars in Ethereum lost because of this, right? We've seen loads and loads of hacks happen on financial systems, on health data, on personal data, and all of these things, right? We hear about credit card scams all the time, right? And in this talk, we're not going to be talking about scams that happen due to human error. We're not going to be talking about the guy who calls you up and says, "Haan, maine QR code bhej diya hai, please send me money by UPI," right? So we're not going to be talking about when you are like, not paying enough attention to fall for these scams. Those are human errors. We're just talking about when systems are badly designed to allow other computers to interact with the system in a way that makes bad things possible. Right? So the question is, we don't want to miss even one possibility of a bad thing happening, because sometimes that results in a loss of millions of dollars. So how do we make sure that such a thing does not happen? One technique is formal verification. Formal verification gives you rigorous guarantees even about complex systems. So what does formal verification actually involve? Formal verification is a very simple 3-step process, right? So the first step is to cast your system into some abstract mathematical model. Step 2 is to say, okay, these are the guarantees I want. I will translate these into properties over this model. And step 3 is to somehow check that these properties hold of this model. And if you can do all three, you profit massively, right? So you can do this for any kind of complex system, by the way. It doesn't only have to be security, but in this talk, we'll talk only about security systems, right? And in particular about something called a security protocol, right? So what is a security protocol? Right, you've heard about security protocols in the abstract, right? You hear about the Bitcoin protocol, you hear about how WhatsApp's protocol is end-to-end encrypted and this and that, right? So what exactly is a security protocol? So protocol is basically any agreed upon template on how to communicate. A security protocol is any such template that allows you to communicate securely, right? So one of the fathers of this field is this person called Roger Needham, who once said security protocols are 3-line programs that people still manage to get wrong. And he should know, because he basically proposed, along with somebody else, a 3-line protocol in 1978, which was buggy, but we didn't find out that it was buggy till 1990. So it took 12 years for somebody to find a bug in a 3-line protocol. right? So security protocols are basically designed with some security goals in mind, right? So what is the security goal? The security goal can be authentication, it can be privacy, it can be anonymity, it can be some kind of access control, you name it, you have it, right? What is the key ingredient in all this? It is secure crypto, right? My encryption needs to be good, my signing schemes need to be good, my hashing needs to be something which doesn't collide, right? We want various guarantees of the cryptographic operations that we use in these things. But the question is using secure crypto enough to guarantee that my security objectives are met? And the point that I'm going to try to make is that this is not necessarily the case, right? Protocols might often suffer from something called logical flaws, which hackers can exploit, right? This means that they don't need to break crypto, they don't need to brute force any signature schemes, they don't need to look for collisions in hashing. They can just exploit the behavior of the protocol in a particular kind of environment to actually negate your security objectives, right? And the problem with such flaws is that they might be unearthed only due to some specific kind of executions, right? The one rogue use case that we were talking about earlier. And if testing misses such executions, then this proves to be costly. So we don't want to miss such executions, right? And how do we not miss these? We move to something called an abstract model, which was step 1 in our formal verification, right? And an abstract model manages to cover all possible executions without actually executing the protocol. That's the beauty of it, right? Testing still needs you to sit at your system, execute it and see, okay, what does this do, right? What happens if I give it this input? What happens if I run it in this kind of an environment? What happens if I run it outside of a sandbox, right? All of those questions need to be answered by actually running the system. But formal verification lets you get around all that by doing thought experiments in maths without actually running anything, right? And what is the main thing that we want of an abstract model? It is that it reflects the main aspects of your system but ignores extraneous details, right? So the standard model for security protocols is something called the Alice Bob model, as Professor Vinod also showed you these pictures with Alice and Bob, right? Alice and Bob are placeholder names. They're actually instantiated with machine names at runtime, usually MAC addresses, but we just like to call them, we like to anthropomorphize machines, so we give them human names: Alice, Bob, Charlie, Dave, right? And usually we call the malicious adversary Eve, right? So that's the basic setup, and it's enough to consider one adversary for reasons that I will not get into. Now the question is, how do we check if a protocol satisfies some properties, right? We need to have some notion of what it means for a property to be satisfied in our minds, and that boils down to being encapsulated as something called a threat model, right? So the threat model is basically the answer to the question, what can the adversary do, right? And in this field of symbolic verification, there are these two gentlemen, Danny Dolev and Andy Yao, who wrote a paper in 1983, which was scarily prescient about how the internet works, and said, okay, assume that the network itself is adversarial, right? Anybody who's on the network can be bad. You will not know till the bad thing has happened. And you just assume that anything that you send out is being captured by the bad guy, and anything that you receive is coming from the bad guy, right? So what can the adversary do is this list of things. They can see any message, they can block any message, they can redirect any message, they can masquerade as anyone, they can initiate new communication according to the protocol, right? And then they can mix and match and generate new messages according to some set rules. But what can they not do? They cannot break cryptography, right? So your encryption scheme is so secure that you absolutely need the decryption key in order to, decrypt an encrypted term. Your signature schemes are so good that you cannot manage to masquerade as somebody else without having access to the signing key, right? Your hashes do not collide, blah, blah, blah. So your cryptography is perfect, but the intruder can do all of this other stuff, right? These things. And these three things basically mean that the intruder controls the network. That's where we start, right? So let's start with an example. There are two programs that run on two machines in my network which want to talk, right? So A and B want to talk. So A runs this program. A says, I will pick some random number n and I will choose a B to talk to, and I will send the concatenation of my public key along with the asymmetric encryption of n in B's public key. That's what this means, right? Then I will wait to receive another message, and whatever I receive, if decrypting it with my secret key gives me back this n, then I'm good. Right? That's what A is supposed to do. Similarly, what is B supposed to do, since B actually should be able to talk to A? B says I will receive something that is a concatenation of something along with something that is encrypted in my public key. What I will do is I will try to decrypt this because I have my own secret key. I should be able to decrypt it and get this y that's inside the encryption. And I will now encrypt this y using this x, which I hope is a public key, and send it back out. Okay? That's the basic model. That's the example. Alright, and the property of interest is that after a valid execution between A and B, nobody but A and B should know n. Alright, and we assume that cryptography is perfect, so the only people who can decrypt things that are encrypted in a particular public key are the people who have the corresponding secret key, which is hopefully just that person. Right, so if something is encrypted in A's public key, then only A can decrypt it because only A has their secret key. Okay, and remember that this is all happening over an adversarial network, which is, as we just said in the previous slide, like so, right? So the question is, does this example satisfy this property? Okay, if A and B execute this protocol, they do these sequences of things at their particular ends, but they send out into an adversarial network, right, and receive from an adversarial network. At the end of this, is it true that n is only known to A and to B? So how many people, let's do a show of hands, how many people think yes? So cryptography is perfect, okay? Nobody but the intended recipient can decrypt something in their public key. So how many people think yes, that this property is satisfied? Okay, one person. So we do encrypt n in B's public key here, and we encrypt hopefully n back in A's public key. So it's never sent in the clear. That much is obvious, right? So okay, one person thought yes. How many people think no? Quite a few people think no. Okay, other people are undecided, I guess, right? So the answer is that yes, crypto is perfect, but the answer is actually that this property is violated because you have this kind of an attack. So that's Alice, that's Evie, that's Bob, right? Alice sends out her public key and the encryption of 5 that she's chosen randomly in Bob's public key. Evie picks this up and says, oh, but this is just, a concatenation. What stops me from just removing Alice's name and putting mine in? Right? So Evie puts her name in and then sends the rest of the encryption just as it is back to Bob. Now Bob thinks that, oh, Evie sent me this message. I should be sending 5 back in Evie's public key. And that's what they do. So at this point, Evie already knows 5, even though 5 was supposed to be secret between Alice and Bob. Right? It needn't be 5, it could be some huge number, but whatever it is. Now if Evie stops here, then at some point Alice is going to wait for a message, never receive a message, and then abort because she's not heard back. So in order to keep Alice from getting suspicious, what Evie does is re-encrypts 5 in Alice's public key and sends it along. Now Alice thinks that Bob has sent this back, so Alice thinks she shares 5 securely with Bob, but Bob thinks that he shares 5 securely with Evie. This is a problem, right? And in this case, it doesn't seem like too much of a problem because, okay, it's a random bit string or a random number. I don't really care whether it's secure or not, but it could be a key that you might be using for further communication. In which case, a third person has access to this key and Alice might be encrypting secure confidential information in that key, but the intruder knows how to break that encryption. That's a problem. Right? And nothing happened here. No crypto was broken. Nobody had to sit and brute force any encryption, right? They just had to mix and match terms so that everything worked out. And it looks like the main culprit here is that this name is sent in the clear, right? It's not inside an encryption, so it's right out there and the intruder can basically remove it and add theirs. And nobody has a big neon sign saying malicious over their head, so Bob is willing to talk to whomever and follow the protocol, right? So this attack happens. So maybe adding more encryption is a good thing, right? So sending A's name in the clear was a problem. So why don't we encrypt? Right? This is how developers think, right? They see a bug, they say, okay, what is the easiest solution? If I have infinitely many resources at hand, if I'm not working in, say, an IoT system or something where encryption is costly, I will just tag on a layer of encryption. Ho gaya. Right? But we'll see that doing this, we'll have to find out whether this works or not, right? Because now my testers go at it again, right? They say, okay, you've given me a new protocol, let me test this one. Right, so now you pick and randomly choose B, but now what you do is basically send the same pair as you did earlier, except you tack on an encryption on the outer level. This is what we were sending earlier, and now I've just said, oh, I'll encrypt this again in B's public key, and I'll send that out. So now when B gets this, B can decrypt to find out whom it's coming from, and then they will send back to whomever it's coming from. Right, so now there's an extra layer of encryption in there, but B still sends back Y encrypted with X. Right, but X is inside the encryption, so hopefully this fixes the earlier flaw, right? And it does fix the earlier flaw, right? B can't break open somebody's name and tack their name on while maintaining this same N, right? They can make their own N up and share that with B, and that's perfectly allowed, right? But what we want is if A generates an N, can the intruder still get access to that N? So the property is the same, right? So the question is, does the property hold of this fixed protocol? Right, so how many people think yes?
How they are getting access, like EV is getting access in middle.
EV controls the network. So everything that you send goes to the network, right? It's like somebody might be snooping on your packets, right? So you can think of being on a public or semi-public network, like even in a hostel, right? You're on a network, and I can always kind of snoop on your packets. If your packets are not encrypted, if you're not using HTTPS, then there's stuff that goes out in the clear.
Like if we use HTTPS protocol, they can get access, right?
I agree, that's also a protocol, right?
Yeah.
And you have to show that they can't get access. It's not clear. So that's the whole point behind this work, right? That the minute you use something like HTTPS or SSL or TLS, and TLS is famously formally verified, by the way, you have to show that these things are secure, that nobody can get access. That is something to be shown.
Like in WhatsApp also, they are saying like end-to-end protocol, right?
So that's the point. End-to-end encryption does not necessarily guarantee your security goals. Depends on what your security goals are, right?
They are saying like it's end-to-end, we can't access that.
I agree.
How can we trust that
Precisely.
our private message?
Precisely, right? So most of Europe has gone to this GDPR model, right, where it's data protection. So the minute they say that your data is protected, they need to supply a formal claim of it. So every system that's now built in Europe for governmental use at the very least is formally verified, right? But that's not true of private things like WhatsApp. So they kind of get away with saying, yes, we're end-to-end encrypted, great, fantastic, our crypto is perfect, right? But is perfect crypto enough to guarantee your goals? Clearly not.
Like even I have another note, like you are saying like in incognito mode there is the right, right?
Yeah.
Like they won't save HTA
Right.
stuff. Like is it true that they won't?
We don't know because these are proprietary protocols, right? So unless you get access to the protocol, you can't verify it. And if it's developed by an Apple or a Google, you often do not get access to it. So that's a pity. And what happens is that a lot of very smart engineers sit and, reverse engineer the packets that go back and forth in a hope to figure out the shape of the protocol. Once they figure that out, we try to verify it. But there are some very nice people who develop protocols from the ground up, right? For IoT or for use over like networks like SSL and so on, who make it open source, right? And they put out this thing called a request for comments, where anybody in the world can look at this document. It's usually a huge document, right? About hundreds of pages, and it's riddled with these words that are should, may, must, and can, and they all mean different things, right? So you get this huge document, you're supposed to go through it, it's almost always internally inconsistent, and you're supposed to try to figure out what is happening, right? But at least you have that. So then you can try to figure out an abstraction from there and then verify that, which is what people like me do. But it's not always the case, unfortunately. Right, so okay, so how many people think this one is secure now that we've tacked on an extra layer of encryption? Yeah, doesn't cost you anything to say yes or no. Nobody is hauling you up. Okay, one person says yes. How many? Two people say yes. How many people say, 3 people say yes. How many people say no? Quite a few, okay. That lady in the back over there, why do you think it's no?
Before that, we already had an encryption in the first place. When that couldn't assure, how does adding one more?
But earlier the name was in the clear, right? So the problem was that the name went out clear like this. It wasn't as inside an A-enc. Right? Now the name is also inside an A-enc. So when the packet goes out, it is basically like HTTPS. Right? Because everything is encrypted. There's an encryption at the outermost layer. You can't break the encryption.
What if the names are same?
Whose names are same, sorry?
Like the person who sends, if Alice and Evie, they send to some particular person.
Yeah.
If that person, 2 people's names are same, the person who received may think that.
So 2 people's names are never the same. Okay? So much like it happens in any college, right? If 2 people's names are very common, they're like Ankit Singh, then we distinguish them based on like entry number or something, right? Or date of birth or some such, or Aadhaar number if you're really worried about that, right? So you have ways of distinguishing. So what we're going to say is that these are MAC addresses, right? They're not real names like Alice and Evie. So when you have a MAC address, it's almost always disjoint because it's long enough that you can choose enough that are disjoint. Yes? The format of the packet is known, the protocol is known.
So we can modify that specific, so if the MAC address is say 10 bits or 20 bits,
Yeah?
right, you can modify that.
We're not bothered about those things right now. We're not going to muck around with the implementation level. So we just think of it like a name, and we're not going to bother about overflows or, you know, can I do something if I add in like more bits and so on and so forth.
Modify that section.
How would you? Because it's inside an encryption. So the key is once I send out this packet, whatever that packet is, yahan pe, right, that packet comes in here, can I figure out this N that's inside that packet? I can always make up my own packets and talk to Bob, nothing stops me. Right, so now how many people think it's secure? Okay, a few. Oh, the ones who said earlier, yes, don't. Okay, alright, they still do. What about people who think it's still insecure? Okay, 1 person, 2 people. Why do you think it's insecure?
The bad guy can always initiate a communication and masquerade as the good guy.
Okay.
And then get. Okay, so the bad guy sends a message to the good guy, the receiver,
Mm.
and the receiver sends it back.
Yeah.
And the bad guy knows the public key of the first guy.
Sure.
So he encrypts it and sends it to the first guy.
Yeah.
And then gets MI.
No, but then they get something encrypted in A's public key, right? How do you decrypt it to get N? I mean, if you choose N, it doesn't matter, right, in some sense. But you still can't decrypt it. And if you want to convince Bob that, you know, you are talking to Alice, that's a whole different thing. I agree, you've not convinced Bob that he's not talking to Alice. So that's an attack of a different nature. But what I'm saying here is, since Alice wasn't even involved in the generation of this message, this property is not violated. Huh, you had a possible attack.
What if the keys are leaked?
The keys are not leaked. We are going to assume that.
So, like, why does B know A's private key?
B does not know A's private key.
So, even he will not be able to access the part itself.
No, he doesn't need to because it's encrypted in his public key here. All he needs to know is his own private key.
But what is the message being shared then?
N.
That's what the N is inside the encryption of
Yeah. Correct. But it's encrypted with B's public key over here. B can decrypt those things. Right? And then B encrypts it back in A's public key so that A knows ki yes, B has agreed to. You know? So the point is that both of them at the end of the protocol need to be convinced that they are sharing this securely with each other. Okay, so I guess most of the people who said no are now convinced that it's secure. Unfortunately not. Right, so there's still an attack. So what happens is Alice sends out this big encryption, right? And Evie says, okay, alright, so this is an encryption, I don't know how to read this, but nothing stops me from talking to Bob myself. So what I'm going to do is make up a message that looks like that behemoth over there, right? Where I tack on my name. In the second part, instead of generating a random number, I just throw this entire bunch in. Right? I throw this message in. and then I encrypt with Bob's public key. Okay, I didn't generate a random number. I just took the encrypted message that A had sent out, knowing that it would be encrypted in Bob's public key, added that, sent it again to Bob, encrypted in his public key along with my name. Right? Now what's Bob supposed to do? Bob is supposed to be a nice guy and then send this encrypted in this person's public key. Right? I'm using capital A and capital E as like shorthand for PKA and PKE, by the way. Right? So Bob is supposed to take this, encrypt it in this public key, send it back. Right? The intruder still doesn't have access to the N that was originally generated, but nothing stops the intruder from trying to talk to Bob again. Right? So what they do is just take this and now send it back to Bob. What does Bob's protocol say? Bob's protocol says take this, encrypt it in this thing over here, right? And send this back. This should be an E. I'm so sorry. That's not an A, that should be an E over here. Right? Because you get this, what you do is you throw away this A, you take this and you tack on an E in front. Right? So basically you take the first message, encrypt it using your name. Bob sends you the thing that you have encrypted, right? Encrypted in your public key. You decrypt that, throw away Alice's name, and now encrypt it using your name again. And then Bob's role says, Achha, take this thing that's inside, encrypt it in E's public key that should be over here, and send this back. And there's an attack over here. Right? So I hope that this has convinced you that even simple protocols that seem semantically correct are often not. Right? Because indiscriminately tagging on encryption is not a guarantee of safety. Right? So sometimes we need to do all of this rather painful analysis to figure out whether there's an attack or not. And ideally what we want to do is to have tools do this analysis for us because we are lazy people. Yes?
So Bob decrypts it twice?
Bob decrypts different messages, right? So Bob decrypts this one first, and then he sent it back to Evie. His role's done. He thinks, okay, this session is done. Then he gets another message and his role is to decrypt that and send it back. So he doesn't know that they're related.
But that's still encrypted, right? How will Eve replace the A's?
So this one is encrypted in Eve's public key, right? This message. So she decrypts it, gets this pair. From the pair breaks out the A and puts in her name, which should be E here. Sorry. Is that causing the confusion? I'm not sure.
So, so Bob receives the packet.
Yes.
It decrypts it.
Yeah.
And then encrypts it with E's public key.
Yep, because this is what the name is here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it encrypts it in
Yeah.
E's public key. And then finally when Eve tries to decrypt it, it will still get the same packet which he received from Alice, right?
No, because that packet was encrypted in Bob's public key and this packet is encrypted in Eve's public key. So Eve can decrypt it to get this pair in here, but they could not have decrypted this to get this pair in here. Do you see the difference?
Encrypted E's public key with that and then...
No, so that's the whole point, right? Just stare at this long enough and you'll figure it out. So the role says, I get some name, right, some public key, and I get an encryption in my public key, the whole thing encrypted in my public key. My role is to take this thing that's encrypted in my public key, encrypt it in this public key and send it back. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah? So this is what Evie gets in step 1. Which is not the same as this because PKB is not the same as PKE. In particular, anything that's encrypted in PKE can be decrypted by the adversary. So they get access to this pair that's inside. Right? Stare at it long enough, you'll get it. Yeah.
Like when Alice sends message, right, with a protocol, like for that, Eve is again getting like layering a protocol, right?
She's layering an encryption, that's right.
Encryption again she is doing.
Yes.
While Bob, how can he decrypt that Eve is that protocol?
Because it's encrypted in his public key, right?
Okay, it's encrypted.
Yeah. You see that shape over there. This PKB at the end is all that you're worried about.
Again, Bob is sending back, like it's again encrypted, right?
He doesn't know that, right? Because any good encryption scheme will return to you something that is indistinguishable from a random number. Remember that, right? A good encryption scheme, an encrypted message and a random bit string look indistinguishable. So Bob doesn't know that this is not a randomly chosen bit string. He thinks, okay, this person is good to go. They've chosen a bit string randomly. Let me respond in good faith. Yeah, the lady behind you had a question. Okay. Yeah, so stare at it long enough. I'll fix the typo when I upload the slides, then it might make more sense. So basically the point is that this A needs to be an E. Yes.
So if you can go back to the previous slide, please.
Yes.
So the setup is such that you're requesting B to send back the message N
Yes.
encrypted.
Yes.
That feels a little contrived, right? Because for instance, if A just sends the value to B and B just acknowledges or something.
So that's the thing. So here the acknowledgement is just this, right? So the thing is that this could be part of a bigger protocol, as things often are, right? So you might have something like an OSCOR that's used for, a CBOR, and then a CBOR that's used in something else. And when you do these kinds of layerings, you end up with stuff like this.
But would you agree that if B did not send back the
I agree.
original value, that will fix this?
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, a simple fix is to just put this name in here and not encrypt twice. So that's what works, right? But indiscriminate encryption does not. So if you just get a tester's report saying, oh, there's this attack, and that's because your name is sent in the clear, and you just say, okay, tack on a layer of encryption, that's not going to work. And the only thing that I'm trying to demonstrate with this admittedly toy protocol is that, and by the way, this one is a variant of what that gentleman in the first slide, Roger Needham, came up with in 1978. So it is very, very minimal. It is very toy because it was intended for like a network of 5 computers inside a room, right, where you had to take your shoes off to go inside. And basically, they weren't thinking too deep. But the whole point of this is to say that yes, sometimes testing comes back with good reports, and then people fix it. But then you have to test again. And if you miss this use case, like a lot of us did, and I did too the first time, right? It's like your tester might say, okay, everything's great. But then your hacker comes along and does exactly this. And that's a problem. Right? So now the Sherlock Holmes angle, since we've seen the hacker angle, how do we formally show that a property is holding off a protocol or not? Right? What we do is we do the Holmesian thing of collecting information and performing inference. Right? And the question is, there's a whole lot of information, right? Like people are talking about packets, about headers, about metadata, about lengths of MAC addresses, about various things, right? Energy consumption, heat signatures. What information are we actually interested in, right? The point is that we are only interested in the relevant parts of the communicated messages. What is relevant is up to the protocol designer, right? They tell you what is relevant. If they say, oh, as a part of this exchange, no more than 240 watts of electricity should be consumed, then that's relevant, right? Even though it's not a communicated message. So it's up to the designer and the person doing the abstraction, and we hope in our heart of hearts that eventually they become the same person, right? Right now that's not true. But the person who does the abstraction needs to take all this into account, right? And the formal model needs to abstract away everything else. All the unnecessary details, all the unnecessary fluff, that goes away. Right, so those two gentlemen that I showed, Danny Dolev and Andy Yao, they said, okay, let's do a simple mathematical thing. Let's model every message as a term in an algebra. Right, and then we'll give them this Backus-Naur form kind of grammar, where I say that a term can either be a term without any further structure, which is M. That could be somebody's name, that could be a random bit string, that could be a number, right? Or it can be a key, which is usually a secret key. Or it can be the public key corresponding to a secret key. Or it can be a concatenation of two terms with a clear separator in between, so you know where to split it, right? A concatenation does not arbitrarily split, it splits at an exact point, right? Or it can be an encryption. And then you can generate new messages according to some rules of inference, right, like Holmes would. And then you say, okay, what is my basic model, what kind of terms am I interested in? I am interested in what messages the adversary has access to. I am interested in the knowledge of the adversary. And for those of you who have seen these things, the operational semantics for protocols is given in terms of transition systems. Each state in that transition system models the knowledge of the adversary. And you go from one state to the other based on a send or a receive that you might do. Right? So these are the rules. How you read a rule like this is, if everything above the line is satisfied, then the thing below the line is satisfied. The thing in red is the name of the rule. Anything beyond that is some other conditions that you might need for the rule to be fired. Okay? And how you read this is that X derives T. Okay? So we start out with the most fundamental rule, which says that if T belongs to the set X already, then X derives T. That's axiom. Right? That's the basic thing that I say. If I already have something in my set, then it derives it. Right? Then for pairing, I say if I can derive a term T0 and I can derive a term T1, then I can put them together along with the separator in the middle and get this pair, which is T0 comma T1. Right? If I can derive a pair T0 comma T1, since the separator is there, I know exactly where to split it, so I can get either of the Ti's. Right? So that's how to build a pair and that's how to break down the pair. And similarly for encryption, if I have a term T, if I can derive a term T and I can derive a public key, I can do the encryption of T using that public key. And if I have an encrypted term and I have the corresponding secret key, then I can decrypt. Okay? Very simple algebra. We're just starting out with a simple one. You can consider very complicated ones, but this is enough to illustrate the basic ideas. Right? And then we say that X derives T if there is a proof of T from X using some of these rules. You'll usually get a tree. Right? Because you get like, these rules have two premises as they're called. So both of these need to have proofs of their own. Right? So this was our earlier example. Just to quickly run you through what a proof looks like. It basically looks like that. Right? So we start out with Evie knowing everybody's names. Her own, of course. Alice's, Bob's, and maybe other people's also, but we're not interested in that right now. Right? She knows everybody's public key because of the nice PKI that we set up. And then she has her own secret key. Right? So she has all that. In step 1, Alice sends out this message, which Evie adds to her database. Right? So we go from x0 to x1, where we add this term to x0. And then we ask, oh, does x1 actually derive this message that Evie wants to send to Bob? Because every received message has to come from the adversary, right? And every received message needs to be derived. Otherwise, that action is not admissible. Right? So the question is, does x1 actually derive this? And the proof of this is here. Right? So in order to derive this pair, I need to derive each component of the pair because I might apply the pair rule. Right? So I can derive EV because EV is in my database already. That's just axiom. Right? And in order to derive this encryption, what I have is this term, and I break it to get the second part. Right? So you start with what you want and then you build up. Right? Sometimes it might happen that you guess the wrong rule. Right? Maybe there was no pairing to be done. Maybe this was obtained by some kind of weird decryption. Right? And you might guess wrong. What happens then? Right? You do the AI kind of thing of backtracking and trying again. Right? You say, oh, there was no proof from this, now I backtrack. Now we know that backtracking is not great as a strategy. Right? As far as complexity and efficiency goes, it's not fantastic. What we would like is, given x and t, I want to be able to check whether x derives t. And it turns out that if I have some notion of a well-behaved proof, which has no unnecessary detours of this sort, it is actually polynomial time. Okay, and this is an unnecessary detour where I have kind of created an encryption using a proof of x derives t and x derives public key of k, done this encryption, but then I also had a proof of the secret key of k, so I decrypted again. Instead, I could have just used this proof, right? Why do all this unnecessary encryption, decryption? Right? I want to waste as few resources as possible. And it turns out, I'm not going to spend time on this slide, but if you're interested, you can look it up later when I upload the slides, that if you have nice proofs where you can always do such a thing, where you can eliminate all these unnecessary detours, then you can start with x and build forward. right? And it gives you a p-time procedure. And I'm not going to spend time on this slide, you can read it later. Okay, basically this is something called the passive intruder problem, which says if I have a really nice adversary who just looks at packets, just collects packets, doesn't do anything bad with them, right? You sent something out, I picked it up, they sent something out, I picked it up, then I just sent it along to whomever you wanted to send it to. I didn't eat those packets, I didn't block those messages, I didn't send it to anybody else. Alice wanted to talk to Bob. I said, okay, this packet, I saw it, okay, I made a copy, I've kept the copy, now I send the packet back. Okay, and that's all I do. I'm a very benign kind of intruder, right? So that is called the passive intruder problem, because eventually I'm left with a set of packets and I want to check if I can derive a particular message from there, right? And usually protocol designers are very smart people, so they guard against all this, right? They can usually see in their heads, ki, okay, these are the messages that are being sent, there is an obvious attack, change the shape of this message, right? The more interesting problem, and so most protocols are actually secure against passive adversaries, the ones who just collect messages and look at them. The more interesting problem is this active intruder problem, which says, is there any valid execution where a Dolev adversary can violate the property? Which is what we were trying to solve with those two examples, right? We were trying to say, okay, what can the adversary do to violate this property? And it turned out that they had to do more than just looking at packets, right? Looking at packets did not suffice. So the question is, what can a valid execution involve? And the bad news is that it involves two sources of infinity, which makes this problem undecidable, which means that there is no algorithm which given an instance always says yes or no, right? And what are these two sources of infinity? One of them is that you have unboundedly many copies of each role. A role is like A's program, B's program, right? But we said A and B are placeholder names, right? Those will be instantiated at runtime. That's what the Alice Bob model was about. So if they're instantiated at runtime, any number of computers can run any number of copies of each of these, right? So we don't really have a handle on how many. That's one bad thing. The other bad thing is that every time I receive a message, I get it with something like X, Y and stuff in it, right? I get these variables. And I don't know what the intruder has done for those variables, right? All I check is that they are able to derive the term that I received, but the variables could be unboundedly large, right? Like we saw in this one. There. That one, right? This is a huge message. Your actual protocol only mentions something of this size, but you basically took this and put it inside another encryption and made a bigger message, right? So if you only look for messages that are of this size, where your n is always instantiated with like small terms, which don't have further structure, you'll never spot this attack. So this is actually something called a type flaw attack, where instead of a randomly generated string, you took something that was already encrypted and then sent that on, right? So you don't have a very good handle on how big those terms can get. But two people said, okay, let's assume that there are only boundedly many sessions. My network can only handle so many computers talking on it at the same amount of time. If it's the internet, it's a very large number, but it's still finite. There are not infinitely many computers in the universe, right? So as long as we are outside of Douglas Adams. So there's only finitely many computers, there only so many can talk at a time. So there's an implicit bound. And if there's an implicit bound, then this one kind of goes away, right? So basically, if I assume that there's a bound on the number of sessions, the active intruder problem becomes NP complete, right? Which means that I need a polynomially large guess or polynomially many polynomially large guesses, and then the rest is p time, right? So that's nicer than undecidable, by the way. It's not super great, but it's nicer than undecidable. And what it means is that we have nice heuristics to make it better than NP complete, right? So, okay, so there have been loads of tools that have been built using this model, right? We don't want to do all this painful stuff by hand. Even for 3-line protocols, it's really bad. So usual protocols are like huge, right? Like if you've ever seen an RFC, you know that they can be humongous. So you want tools to do this, right? There are nice tools that have been built for this stuff. They allow you also to extend the algebra with new functions, because you might at least want things like XOR, homomorphic encryption, other kinds of signatures, hashing, right? Most general use protocols tend to use those things. So you can extend all that, everything works nicely, you add the right inference rules, life is great. But the problem is that since the overall problem is undecidable, These tools are great for properties like secrecy, which only need you to check one execution at a time. They're not so good for things like equivalence, which is where all our usual properties that we are bothered about, right? Privacy, anonymity, right? Indistinguishability, unlinkability, all of those fall into that class. They're not super great at that. Because what that needs you to do is examine multiple runs, multiple executions of the protocol simultaneously. What you're saying is that when I interact with WhatsApp and when Sumit interacts with WhatsApp, nobody gets to know that these are two different people, right? And maybe they get to know if, depending on whom Sumit and I are talking to, maybe we are talking to different people, there's a different signature, something happens, right? Now it's a question of how many do I need to look at in parallel before I land on the violating one, right? So that's not great, and these tools tend to not terminate when you give them properties like this. But there have been loads of papers that have been written, right, on like super cool things. The 5G key authentication protocol has been analyzed. The signal messaging protocol, which is open source, nice, right, has been analyzed. There are IoT protocols that I've been involved in the analysis of, right? TLS has been analyzed. Smart contracts on Ethereum are starting to get analyzed, right? So there's a lot of work that keeps happening in this area as well. It's very hot right now. But what I'm personally involved in is that we've introduced a new model, much like the Dolevio model, for protocols that involve certification, right? So think about a Google Doc that you have, right? You might encrypt it to say every time I log in, I need to put this password in to access the doc. That's like an encrypted term, right? But now if you allow somebody else edit access to this document, that's a certificate in some sense. Right, you're basically saying, hey, this person is allowed to edit this document, but nobody else is. Right, so those are two different kinds of things in some sense. And when you talk about protocols that involve authorization or delegation or access control, this difference becomes very important. But the Dolevio thing says everything is a term in the same algebra. You implement it however you want to implement it, it looks humongous and ugly. Right, and now nobody can make sense of this. And developers are already reluctant to do all this maths. Now like, arey, aapne itna bada term de diya, right? This is all encryptions and hashing and multiplication. I don't know what to do with this. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to test. Right? And that's the kind of thing where we are going to get around. We're trying to do this thing where we make formal methods more usable. So we said, why not create a new algebra, right? Where certificates are just formulas in a logic. I write these in first order logic. Everybody's seen some manner of first order logic, or I can quickly explain it to them with exist and for all and equality. And now my certificate looks different from an encrypted term. And I send both along, right? So when it's a certificate, I send this formula along. How you implement it is up to you, but now I can talk about zero knowledge proofs and things like that, right? Cute things, but now I get to write them as formulas which are much more readable. So I get better spec, right? And it's more expressive, but it is no more complex because solving the active intruder problem still remains NP complete, right? That's the cool thing. And the even cooler thing is that verifying properties like privacy and anonymity looks like it might become simpler in this model. Because now all we need to do is examine one run at a time instead of simultaneously examining multiple. Because formulas implicitly link terms. They allow me to talk about the link between two terms implicitly. Right, so what we are currently doing is we are working on a general protocol agnostic formulation of these properties, right? What does it mean for a protocol to satisfy privacy? What does it mean for a protocol to satisfy anonymity and things like that? And we're trying to extend the language with other operators as well, right? So how far can I go? How much more can I add by way of expressive power but still keep the complexity the same? And then we're also trying to extend some automated theorem provers with assertions and so on, right? And proving some meta-theoretic properties about them and things like cock and lean. So if you want to know more, please get in touch. I'm sorry for going slightly over time, but these are the details and the slides will be up with the typo fixed. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Vaishnavi, for the enlightening talk. Let's open the floor for questions. No questions, really?
Well, they've all asked them in between.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. At least few questions. Okay, looks like everything is crystal clear. Okay, good. Next, thanks again. So here's some small memento.
Thank you.